Bruce, you've written more than a dozen of books, walked 10,000 miles throughout the desert, spent a year as a circus clown, survived capture, and just returned from a 50,000-mile journey across 16 countries. After all of that, what is the most important thing you've learned about life?
The most important thing, first of all, welcome. Nice to have you here. So after all that, what's the most important thing I learned about life? The most important thing I learned about life, I learned from my father. And it is the balance between short-term sacrifice and long-term gain and enjoying yourself along the way. So I think you simultaneously need to imagine a future, like invest in the future, do the hard work that can prepare you for the future, and yet make sure that you're not only looking at the future, you're also looking at the past. And I think that the way to do that, the mechanism that we have for stitching together the future, the present, and the past is the story. While you're balancing short-term sacrifice for long-term gain and enjoying yourself along the way, turn everything into a good story.
Turn everything into a good story. I think it's a common challenge. I think that's the challenge of my life. It's to have goals and delay gratification.
Yes.
And then always the same message. If you ask the question, like, what would you recommend to your past self? It's always the same for me. Enjoy more. Because you always have big goals. Just soak it all in.
Okay, so you're saying is on that balance, you're more tilted toward the short-term sacrifice for long-term gain than enjoying yourself along the way.
Right. I've been that in my past, but I'm trying to enjoy the journey more compared to waiting until you get to that point, if that makes sense.
And do you think enjoying it along the way means giving up the short-term sacrifice for long-term gain? No,
I think it's the same thing, like we're doing here.
Yes, exactly. Like you came here to interview me, and we spent the previous hour and a half telling our life stories and like trying to make that connection. So I think, but I think if you want to put it in the terms that I've come to learn that you think about the world, it is to me it's the difference between living a happy life and living a meaningful life, right? That a happy life is very present oriented. Dogs can be happy. You can be happy in the moment, but a meaningful life allows you to take the happy moment and the unhappy moment and stitch them together, into a more fulfilling life. And that what a meaningful life does that a happy life doesn't is balance the present with the past and the future. And as I said, the mechanism that's most efficient to do that is the story.
Yeah, have you heard about the third path, Psychological Rich Life by Beggi? I think it's called.
Yeah, so tell me what that means to you.
It's basically like I'll share a little bit. When you were sharing our story, and I was talking about like when I read your book, and that's the reason why we're having this conversation. I was kind of lost, and my life didn't make sense. So
you had left Iceland and you were living in Los Angeles.
Right.
And you walk into a bookstore.
I walk into a bookstore. That's like for a kid walking to a candy store. I can spend there for hours.
And so when life is in the transitions is basically just sitting there.
It's just, I pick up this book and it's just life in the transitions. And just I watched it and I was just like, transitions? Yeah, I'm in transitions. And then I kind of read it and read a little bit. And then I decided to read it. And it was so immensely helpful in my life. And it's my second most recommended book for people. The first one is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
and Life is in the Transitions actually tells the story of Man's Search for Meaning and how it came about.
Yeah, right. But the psychological, so I finished on that, Psychological Rich Life. So we always knew about two paths to living a happy or meaningful life. So at the end of your life, if you lived a happy life, I was happy. I lived comfortably. I was secure. I had a lot of fun. If you live a meaningful life at the end of your life, you can say, I contributed a lot beyond myself. I left this world a better place. If you live a psychological rich life, you can say, wow, I experienced a lot of things. My perspective increased. My wisdom, I gained a lot of wisdom. Wasn't always easy.
Yes.
But that was something that when I heard that concept, that landed really well on me. And I see a synergy between at least the book Life is in the Transition, which is about meaning making and everything.
Yes.
But I see also the psychological rich life as a part of that, like conceptual framework.
Yeah. And I think, look, I mean, how I didn't set out in my life to write a book about life. I didn't set out in my life, even when I started on that project, I didn't have the language of happy life versus meaningful life. I didn't even have the language for transitions. But what motivated me to do it was that I lived what I now think of as the kind of classic linear life. Like I grew up in Georgia in the American South. I left the South. I went to college in the Northeast. I left there. I moved to Japan. I started writing letters home. I'm so much older than you. We've just established that I'm the age of your mother. But I started writing letters home on crinkly airmail paper, right? Because you weighed it by the ounce. And I hand wrote these letters and I sent them back to Georgia. And they were basically like, you're not going to believe what happened to me today. And when I got back home, everyone said, I loved your letters. And I was like, have we met? And my grandmother had Xeroxed them and passed them around and they went viral in the old-fashioned sense of the word. Like you are a geek of going viral in the modern sense of the world, but we are sitting here having this conversation because your viral life like has intersected with my OG viral life, where people were hand copying these letters and passing them around. And I thought, oh, if this happened to me, I should write a book about it. That was my book, Learning to Bow, about Japan. And it doesn't happen this way. I sold my first book at 24. I've just sold a book contract that will take me to 40 consecutive years of writing books professionally. I did this for no money for a while. Then I had success. I got married. I had children. That's what I call the fantasy linear life. You're from a country with ice in the name of it. Like that's the hockey stick that they talk about in entrepreneurship, right? A small flat and then boom, everything is straight. That was my life in my 20s and 30s. And then, older than you are now, my life blew up. Right. First, as you know, I got cancer as a young adult when I had identical 3-year-old twin daughters. Then I had financial troubles. And then my dad, who was never depressed a minute in his life, got Parkinson's, got depressed, tried to take his own life 6 times in 12 weeks. And so suddenly that linear life that we all fantasize just became a nonlinear squiggle, and I was completely confused. And especially as somebody who is a professional storyteller, I couldn't tell the story of my life. I felt frozen, like I had lost the plot of my life. And it was essentially when I finally started telling that story, everybody around me said, oh, I had a moment when I lost the plot in my life, when I felt off track or off kilter or just somehow off the grid or off schedule. And I called my wife and I said, I'm not the only one who feels this way. And I want to do something to help. And that's what propelled me into the journey that's in effect led us to this conversation.
Mm. And for people who are listening, like what is a transition?
So what I did in response, to pick up the narrative for a second, is that I started collecting and analyzing life stories. So in now the intervening decade, I have collected and analyzed 500 life stories of people of all walks of life, all ages. And I listen to them like we're having this conversation. I then transcribe them. I code them with a team of people. And I've now written basically 3 books about this, and my life is about talking about the stories of our lives. These are the 3 things that I learned, okay? Number 1, the linear life is dead. Okay, so you've asked, what is the linear life? The way I've come to understand this is that the way we look at the world affects how we look at our life. So in the ancient world, they didn't have linear time. There were no clocks. Okay, that was an agricultural economy. What's an agricultural economy? It's the cycle of the seasons. So that was how they thought the world worked. And so they thought the human life was a cycle. To every season, turn from the, from the Hebrew Bible. That's how people understood it. Then actually it's the Hebrew Bible that introduces the idea of linear life. That's a single family in that narrative. And so by the Middle Ages, they begin to think that life follows a track. But it's the different track than we think now. That track was straight up to middle age, then straight down. That's no second relationship. That's no second job. That's no, in this country, like, moving to Florida and opening a B&B or an Airbnb. Like, it's straight up to middle age and straight down. And as we know, the average life expectancy was, 40 until 1900. So that's that trajectory. This changes in the 19th century when the Industrial Revolution, what does that introduce? That introduces the factory. How does the factory work? It's a conveyor belt. It's an assembly line. Everything is very linear. And if you look in the 20th century, and you've studied psychology more than I have, most of the psychological constructs follow that linear pattern. So Piaget with childhood development, Freud, psychosexual development, Erikson, the 8 stages of modern development, the 5 stages of grief, the hero's journey. All of these are very linear constructs because they think the world is linear. This reaches its peak in the 1970s with a woman named Gail Sheehy writes a book called Passages. It sells 20 million copies. I would say all of our mothers read it, but for you, it might have been your grandmother. And it says everyone does the same thing in their 20s and 30s, and then everyone has a, wait for it, midlife crisis between 39 and 44 and a half. And by the way, that's how precise it was. You got a 5-year window of time to have your midlife crisis. But take something that everybody listening to us remembers, the pandemic. If you were between 39 and 44 and a half, you could have been in a crisis. But if you were 16, or my children were 14 at the time, they were in crisis. If you're 67 and 71, like, we have these crises at all times. Right? So the linear life is dead because what happens in the 21st century, and this is the world that you've grown up in and that you are native to and a part of, it's global. It's the internet. It's web. We're connected from all over the world. Changes come at us from all places, from all directions, at all times. Even the pandemic, right? It begins in, begins in China, then it shows up in Italy. It's like things become nonlinear. So we have changed how chaos theory is how they talk about it in physics, as you know. We've changed how we view the world, but we haven't changed how we've looked at the human life. So that's what, in effect, that I've been doing in this work. So the linear life is dead. It's been replaced by the nonlinear life, which has many more twists and turns, right? Just to speed through this, my data show we go through 36 disruptors in our lives. One could be as small as a fender bender, or, twisting your ankle, or, a minor, an injury of some kind. But 1 in 10 of those becomes a very big event. I call it a lifequake. Okay. And about half of these are voluntary, half of them are involuntary. And these become massive bursts of change, which lead to pain and confusion, but can lead to renewal and growth if you handle it correctly. So the lifequake is the underlying event. And the life transition, which was your question, is the human response to the lifequake. It's how we get through the lifequake. And so the last of my 3 lessons is, transitions are a skill that we can and must master, because the data show we go through half of our adult lives in a lifequake. In transition, we are not using this language. The last major book on this was in 1979, Before Life is in the Transitions. And everybody is feeling confused. It's coming at us faster. And by the way, here comes AI. Here comes a lot of technological disruption. These events are coming at us faster. They are destabilizing us more. But these are skills that we can get better at.
100%. And I agree on a cultural level, then also just on a nonlinear path level, like you just talked about. Then when somebody is like, because you hear that you're supposed to have a partner by this age, you're supposed to be a millionaire by this age. Yes. And so many people feel left behind, or they are on social media in terms of like comparing themselves to other people. And like, what would you say to them that is not living? They feel like they are not in the place where they should be because they haven't gotten to a certain standard or a milestone that society rewards.
Yes. So this is the thing that I have said that is most quoted back to me. Here's how I heard what you just said. We have linear expectations of our lives, but we have nonlinear lives. The problem is not the lives. The problem is the expectation of the life we're going to be living. Okay? So we have linear expectations and nonlinear lives. The problem is not the life. The problem is what we think the life is going to be. So what we need to do is align our expectations with the realities of how we live. And to me, this particular gap is responsible for half of the depression, dissatisfaction, confusion, pain that we experience now. So let's focus on the expectation. Let's don't focus on the lives. The signature piece of data in 500 life stories that I've collected is that we have 3 to 5 lifequakes in our lives, and their average length is 5 years. 3 to 5 lifequakes, 4, 5, 6 years. That's 25 years. That is half of our adult lives we spend in transition. You or someone you love or someone you live with or someone in your family or someone you know is in a life transition right now. And the problem that we have is that we have normalized the stable times. And we have stigmatized the unsettled times. And we have created this whole language. We have to grit or grind or resilience our way through. And even that language says that the times of transitions are problems that need to be solved by personal suffering. In fact, that is the norm. We have to make the abnorm into the norm. And once you accept the fact that half of your life is in transition, when you're in transition, you stop beating yourself up about it and you set about getting through it in a more effective way.
Yeah, you become more peaceful. And the question I've been posing is that exactly what you're doing, that life transition is a skill.
Correct.
And I've come to the conclusion, I think you can feel most of the time peaceful and joyful within a transition.
The number one reaction to my work, and this is a technical scientific term, is whew, like you were putting language to something I didn't realize there was language for.
Yeah.
Okay. My wife likes to say that I have hard knowledge about soft things. So this is sort of a soft thing, okay? And it's perceived to be something that might be, squishy or abstract or, embarrassing or shameful. We can get into the top emotions that people feel when they go through life transitions, but they are normal times that everybody goes through. So let's look at the data, right? So I analyzed transitions on 2 axes. One was voluntary versus involuntary. And there, the numbers show that 40, let me do this again. There, the numbers show that 43% of life transitions are voluntary. And I looked at this and I was like, oh, great. We are embracing the possibilities of the nonlinear life. Okay. But 57% are involuntary. Okay. And I had a bunch of millennials on my team who were helping me analyze this. They're like, whoa, you mean the perfect life that I sketch out when I'm 18 or I'm 21 or whatever, that's not going to come true? And I'm like, no, that's not going to come true. That's the reality. Okay. So what is an involuntary transition? An involuntary transition is there's a downsizing, there's a health diagnosis, there's the death of a loved one, there's a global pandemic. Like those are involuntary transitions. But as we said, almost half of them, 43%, are voluntary. What is that? You move, as you did in your life, from one country to another. You choose to get married. I am the parent of identical twin daughters. It was a joyful occasion. We had 2 babies in 32 minutes. It was a lifequake. Like everything about our lives changed in half an hour. Okay? What's an involuntary lifequake? Your spouse cheats on you. What's a voluntary lifequake? You cheat on your spouse, right? So, but those are relatively balanced. Okay? That's one bit. The other axis that I evaluated them on are personal versus collective. And here, most of them were personal when I started these conversations back in 2017. So what's personal versus collective? Personal is, something involving your work, something involving your beliefs, something involving where you live, something involving who you love. Collective involves a lot of people, like a natural disaster, right? Think about the pandemic, right? The smallest category was collective involuntary. So what's a collective involuntary, right? That would be a pandemic. That would be a war, okay? That would be a natural disaster. What's interesting now is, and when I first did this, I thought, why is that so small? Like if I had done these conversations a century ago when you had 2 world wars, the Great Depression, right? Women's rights, gay rights, civil rights, there were a lot of collective involuntary transitions that were happening in the 20th century. That wasn't the case for most of the last 20 years, but now they're escalating. Okay. Now you had in the 2020s alone, you had the pandemic, right? Then you had global recession. Now here comes AI to destabilize. So we have I think it's become even more acute, this aching for transitions and how to manage them more effectively since I started this project a decade ago, because we have all the personal ones we've been having, but now we also have these collective ones that we're having. So I think we're being bombarded even faster than we were 10 years ago when I started this project.
Yeah. Yeah, from both angles, for sure. On that topic, like, let's go a little bit into because you mentioned like work.
Yes.
And just because we were talking about this, that you wrote a book about how to find meaningful work post.
I did, called The Search, yes.
What do you what do you think, if you can give me a brief scenario of what happened? Because when people are going to lose their jobs, which AI will take some of those, what do you think will be happening for? Because I think the question is what will give people purpose and meaning in their lives.
And so I did several hundred interviews of people who'd been through workquakes, I call them, these changes in their work life and looking for patterns. And I think that I think in some ways the most important lesson from that project is just as we have to move from thinking about our life from being a kind of a muddled collection of biological phenomenon to a narrative, right? We have a life story. And what you do in the course of your life is you continue to update the story of your life so that when you go through a lifequake, in effect, what you're doing is you're losing the plot of your story and then you're reclaiming it. And in effect, you're adding a chapter to your life story. And that understanding of life as a narrative from the field of narrative psychology, as you know well, is a new way to understand the human life, of the last, say, 30 years, okay? That life is the story that you tell yourself, okay? But we haven't really moved that to the idea of your work, right? That your work life is a story with the same number of twists and turns. So I asked people in my conversation, what is the biggest upside about work that you learned from your parents? I'll ask you. We'll do it in real time here. What's the biggest upside about work that you learned from your parents?
I would depends on, I would say just being able to be here now. But that's a very abstract answer. But I would say the biggest upside towards them having work was probably I had safe and secure home when I was young.
I see. Okay. But looking at what they did with their work, what was the most important lesson you took from their work life?
Oh, to serve something beyond yourself.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So that's an interesting answer. So 2/3, because you are sitting here right now, you're not sitting where 2/3 of people, which statistically is a meaningful number, said the number one thing that they learned from their parents is the value of hard work. Okay. And then everything else was clumped smaller. And just because I was asking these questions every day and the answer was the same, I thought to myself, I'm missing something. So I started asking people what I'm now going to ask you. What was the biggest downside about work that you learned from your parents? So I'm going to ask you, what's the biggest downside about work that you learned from your parents? The negative example of their work lives.
I think my dad, when I was young, sometimes just left really early and came very late.
There we go.
So I was absent because he was taking care of the family.
So there we go. So the answers to that question were each clumped around 1/3 each. One was the challenge of overwork. Number 2, the effects on the family. And number 3, unhappiness. Okay? That's the difference. People today, especially people of your generation, say millennials and Gen Z to use those problematic terms, but people under 40 or under 45, they're willing to work hard, but not if it means overwork, sacrificing the family, and being unhappy. And so to me, that is the big change, that the idea of, in that linear 20th century idea, was that you still had this model of finding one job, doing it for your entire life, even if it was a strain on the family, even if it meant unhappiness, if it provided for the family and was the stable thing to do. Now people no longer feel that way. And so therefore, what happens in the course of a work life is your number one reason for work changes. So in the beginning of your work, like I have young adults who are about to graduate from college, and therefore I'm around a lot of people in their 20s, okay? And they're trying to figure it out. They might do things for any number of reasons, okay? They might do it for money. They might do it for public service. They might do it for creativity. They might do it for self-expression, whatever it might be. So maybe that's what you're doing in your 20s. Well, then maybe suddenly you get married and have children, as I did, and suddenly providing for the family. So then maybe for a time, you're going to say, oh, I now need to work for money because I either have to provide for my children, or I want to, buy a place to live, or I want to get a car, or I need a new tire, or whatever it might be. And maybe you do that for, let's just say, 25 years as you are raising your family, but then there will come a time when your children will then leave the house, at which point you may say, you know what? I sacrificed my own personal meaning for the larger purpose of finding meaning and supporting my family, and now I want to do something for myself, or now I want to give back, or whatever it is. So the point is, your work life is nonlinear, and you can go through these different phases where what the meaning you seek from your life changes. And that gets to this sort of core idea of the ABCs of meaning and how they evolve and oscillate in the course of our lives.
Yeah. That's the ABC of meaning that you talk about, how to master life transition. Before I jump into that, I want to ask you, what has been your biggest life quake?
My biggest, that's an interesting question. So what have been the major life quakes of my life? I had a fairly stable childhood. So a lot of people have life quakes, if you lose a parent or lose a home so I had a fairly stable. I would say the life quakes of my life were probably the first was bringing travel into my life. So leaving my home in the South and going to the North, and then leaving and going to Japan. So I would say there was this sort of travel I come from a very stable home. And like you, I think that's one of the reasons that I could be unstable voluntarily. So I would say that was in my 20s. Then I would say the biggest life quake in my life was the back-to-back of having identical twins in 2005, and then having a 9-inch osteosarcoma in my left femur at 2008. So it was the back-to-back of losing my freedom, having my children, losing the ability to walk, and almost losing my life. So all of those, the average length of a life quake, that was a 5-year life quake in every way, shape, and form. And in every way, shape, and form, kind of rethought, forced me to remake how I view the world, and then have it be less oriented toward myself and more oriented, toward the people around me.
Mm. It was 2 years between you became a father and then you got the cancer.
It was 3 years. The girls had just turned 3 when I had a routine blood test, and it turned out I had a 9-inch tumor in my left femur. I had a disease that's a pediatric cancer that 800 people a year get one, and 85% are under 21. So I was one of only 100 people a year who got one in 2008. And 25 years ago, they would have cut off my leg and hoped, and there was a 15% survival rate. There was one cocktail of chemotherapy that was effective, and I got that, except it was made for children, and I was a 43-year-old man, and so it just knocked me out. So I had a year of crutches. I had 2 years of crutches. I had a year of chemotherapy, and then a surgery that was so rare, only 2 people before me had ever had it. They took out my femur, replaced it with titanium, took my fibula from my left calf and relocated it to my left thigh where it now lives, and took out half of my quadricep. So crutches for 2 years, a cane for a year after that, and basically physical therapy in one form or another in the 18 years since that happened. And as you know, what I did was 3 days after getting this diagnosis, and I thought I was going to die, I asked a group of male friends to be present in the lives of my daughters. And I called this group of men the Council of Dads. And we picked 6 men, my wife and I. She rejected most of my nominees. She was like, I like them, but I would never ask them for advice. So keep them away from my children. So it turned out to be a very efficient way to find out what my wife really thought of my friends. But that I now see as my reaction to the fear of losing my life and the fear of being isolated, and the fear of destroying the lives of my children. This was an effort to bring people closer so that I wasn't experiencing this alone. Now, later in my life, when I started thinking about life transitions and I started realizing, there are things you can do, and one of them is share your story, I realized that I was doing a lot of things that other people did, but at the time I was just doing them. I wasn't and I was intentional about it, but I wasn't thinking about it analytically as I do now.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes that, like when we're in the middle of the storm, sometimes the understanding comes later.
Oh, absolutely. Mm. Yeah, I mean, of the stories that I did, and a lot of them I did in the room where you and I are having this conversation right now, the ones that were least effective were the ones that people who were in the transition, because you often do not have the perspective that you have when you've gotten through it. And in fact, one of the we can talk about the phases and the tools, whatever you want to talk about, but a lot of this is in life is in the transitions, of course, but the one sign that you're getting through it is when you actually move from present tense to past tense. When you start saying, rather than I am in the transition, I was in the transition, as opposed to this is happening to me, that did happen to me. And that little, because a lot of this is your life story, that little narrative trick of starting to say, oh yeah, that is something that happened to me. I'm going through this now. My brother, with whom I'm very close, just lost his wife 2 months ago after 10 months of leukemia, and a very sudden thing. And I could see him oscillating between talking about her in the present tense and in the past tense, talking about this experience in the present tense, but anticipating a past tense. You can see it, but you can hear how people work their way through it, in part by how they tell the story.
Do you think that's like, I'll share an example. Like my hardest time was when I moved from Iceland to the US, and then I stopped being in an HV relationship. It took me a long time to recover. But then after a year and 2 months or something, I suddenly had like days and weeks and months, and I was like, I hadn't thought about it for like a couple of weeks. So do you think it's like that, like you start to speak with you in past tense? Do you think it's voluntarily or something that just happens?
Well, okay, let's first of all go back to what you just said. Because you and I both, you asked me the biggest lifequake, and then I talked about this back-to-back of the birth of our children, and then the cancer, which almost took their father away. That's not one event, that's 2 events, one lifequake. When you just shared the biggest lifequake of your life, it was not one event, but 2 events. This was an absolute pattern in the conversations that I had that is, as best I can tell, undiscussed in the social science about the life course and life changes, which is that these events tend to clump. Okay? And naming this was one of the, say, 3 hardest things that I had to do, because I came up with 100 different names, and eventually I came up with the name of, it's a pileup, because it's like those old black and white movies that maybe you have in the distant memory of your short life. But I'm old enough to remember when they were black and white movies. But where the first car stops and then boom, 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 all the other cars stop, or the first person stops walking. That's what it is. So, but why? Like, some of it is coincidence. Like you just happen to you just happen to lose your job when your mother needs to have her eye surgery, right? Or you just happen to get cancer diagnosis when your child has an anxiety disorder and your spouse is drinking too much. Like, so some of it is a coincidence. Some of it, but some of it's not. Like, some of it is, the way I've come to think about it is, like, you know how it's like your body has a transition immunity, and like once you have one disruptor, like you become more open. So let me then ask you, was there a correlation between your move from Iceland and the end of the 8-year relationship?
Oh, 100%.
Okay, so what's the correlation?
Correlation is that at the end of our relationship, and she moved to another country permanently and came back and stuff. And that it never have dawned on me that I wanted to be away from Iceland and now away from her, and that she would not be a part of my life.
Right.
So that opened my idea of doing a PhD in another country and going. But I still probably wouldn't have left if we were in a relationship.
Right. Okay. So suddenly what happens is, in the language that I have come to understand the world in, not to be clinical and impersonal, but I'll do this for a second, the linear path got disrupted.
Yes.
There was the easy path. Okay. You have siblings. They're on a traditional path. I don't know if your parents are on a traditional path or not. You're on that path, and suddenly there's a lifequake. There's a disruptor. It changes. And then so therefore you're telling the story. The thing we know about storytelling is that we are wired to understand the world in stories. And as soon as I start telling a story, you finish it, okay? So I'm going to tell a story right now in this conversation. Oh, we're here upstairs. Okay, my bedroom is next door. I wake up one morning. It has snowed overnight. I walk downstairs. I put on a coat. I open the door. What do I see? Okay, your mind is finishing that story. What are you expecting me to see? It snowed overnight. I put on my coat. I open the door. What are you expecting me to see?
New York or postman or somebody bringing in morning groceries.
Fine, but it's going to be cold. You're going to see. Yeah. You're expecting it to be snow, right? Or a person. Yeah. The daily life. Now I'm going to tell this. I'm going to go back and tell them. Okay, it snowed overnight. I wake up. I have breakfast. I go downstairs. I put on my coat. Open my door. What do I see? A giant pile of donuts. What happens to you right now? You're paying attention. Mm-hmm. What is going to happen? You are surprised. This is not what you expected. What am I going to do? Am I going to shut the door and go back and take my coat off and go back inside? Am I going to eat the donuts? Am I going to start giving away the donuts? Am I going to throw away the donuts? You want to know. What happened in your case, that's a plot twist. That's a disruptor. The question is that a disruptor or a lifequake? We don't know. So suddenly your partner, your girlfriend, the person you're going to spend your life with is not in your life. That's a pile of donuts. And that pile of donuts now forces you to react. And because you are more excited about the pile of donuts than the snow and the milkman and the postman, it's the same thing in your own life. It gets you off of the story you think you're telling, and it allows you to consider new possibilities. By the way, you may beg the girlfriend to come back. You may then go get another girlfriend. She may have left you because you already had another, partner, or maybe you don't want to be dating girls anymore. Like, there can be 100 ways, but once you open that up, you embrace the possibilities of the nonlinear life.
Mm-hmm. Which can be like, as you mentioned, like you get excited when you start to talk about it. And I get excited as well, because for most people, change and transitions and not knowing where they're going, or there's too much chaos in life, is scary and difficult. But at the same time, in chaos is always possibility for order to emerge and something new to happen.
Correct. But when people have these experiences, they do one of two things, okay? Either, if people experience a lifequake, the response is one of two ways. Number one, they make a 212-item to-do list, and they say, I'm going to get through it in a weekend, and I'm going to get a blue ribbon and a gold star, and I'm going to be the best ever. So my girlfriend left me, or I have a disease, or I've lost my job. These are the 14 things, or the 212 things I'm going to do, and I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to be very done. We're going to be quickly, and don't ever talk to me about it. I don't want to be scared. That's one reaction. The second reaction is they lie under the covers with a cat in a fetal position, and they say, I'm never going to get through it. Woe is me. I'm stuck and I'm going to be in the mud. Neither one of these is true. When you look at enough of these, certain patterns become clear. And so these life transitions have 3 phases. I call them the long goodbye, where you accept that it's an emotional experience and you mark it in some way. The messy middle, where you shed certain habits and you experiment with new ones. And then the new beginning, where you unveil your new self. And we could break down the transition that I was in and that you were in into these 3 phases. So the first thing to understand is that the lifequake is the underlying event. The life transition is the reaction to the underlying event. It's the human reaction. So think of it this way, like the life transition. No, think of it this way. The life quake puts you on your heels. The life transition puts you back on your toes. So the first step to going through a life transition is to identify that you're going through a life transition. Like, I'm now trying to respond to this underlying event, either one that I created or one that happened to me, and look at what you're the lifequake you've just described. Something happened to you, in which case your partner made a decision. So that's involuntary. And then you made a voluntary reaction. And by the way, in the very room we're sitting in, about 8 years ago, I had all these young people around me. And I said, tell me something that happens in a life transition that I'm not asking about. And by the way, I did this for 1,500 hours. Like, I did not think it was possible for there to be a question about life transitions that I wasn't asking. And a guy raises his hand. He wasn't in the chair you're sitting in, but nearby. And he said, I think people move. And so we went back and reran the numbers. 60% of people move in a life transition. 60%. It could be moving across the world as you did. It could be, moving offices, building a treehouse, moving across town. The response is when you get loosened from the life path you're on, you begin to examine other life paths.
Interesting. And new environments also just so fantastic for new beginnings.
What?
New environments are so fantastic for new beginnings. Like you start with just a blank piece of paper.
And I think this is the point, right? To me, so let's go back to these 3 phases.
Yeah.
So once you've accepted, once you accepted that you're in a life transition, a life quake, and you've identified, I want to get through the life transition, then where should you begin? Okay, because you've got these 3 phases. Okay, the answer: pick your transition superpower. Okay. These 3 phases, the long goodbye, these 3 phases, these 3 phases, the long goodbye, the messy middle, the new beginning. Everybody's good at one and they're bad at one and they're the middle, okay? So some people are good at turning the page and some people get stuck, okay? Some people are good in the messy middle because they like making lists and experimenting with new things. Some people are even good at new beginnings, but you're going to be bad at one. So let me ask you, which of the 3 phases what's your transition superpower? And what's your, Superman here. What's your transition superpower? And what's your Clark Kent? What is your kryptonite?
I think I've come to develop in being superpower in the messy middle. I wasn't there.
You were not that originally?
No.
Okay. So that's your good. So which one are you weakest at? The professor
long endings, probably. The ending part.
The ending part, yeah. Right. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's break it down so people can decide what they're good at. So the reason that the long goodbye is difficult is because it's grappling with the emotions. I looked hundreds of people in the eye and I said, what's the biggest emotion you struggled with in your time of change? Number 1 answer, fear. How am I going to get through it? How am I going to survive without this loved one? Okay, how am I going to pay my bills if I've just lost my job? How am I going to walk if I've just lost one of my limbs? How am I going to find a place to live if a tornado just took off the roof of my house? Number 1 is fear. Number 2, and I've seen you talk about in your public voice in the world, is sadness. I'm sad that I lost that person. I'm sad that I lost that job. I'm sad that my child has an eating disorder. But it's the number 3rd one, I misspoke, that I've heard you talk about, which is shame. I'm ashamed that I need help. I'm ashamed that I lost this job where my identity came from. I'm ashamed that I was drinking too much. Okay? But these are the emotions that people struggle with. And the second thing people do in the long goodbye is use rituals to mark these occasions. Either have collective events, right? Jump out of airplanes, go to sweat lodges, right? Have a farewell party, have a funeral, grieve, celebrate, mourn, dance, whatever it might be. As you know, my new book is about life rituals. But that's the long goodbye. So that the reason that people who were good at the messy middle are bad at the long goodbye is because they want to ignore the emotions, go right to solving the problem, and fine, start with solving the problem.
Yeah.
That's great. But if you ignore the emotions, as I did not have to tell you now as a professional psychologist, those emotions are going to come back to haunt you. You are acting on those emotions. And if you do not identify them, they're going to make getting through your transition more difficult.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
But you're so emotionally intuitive. Why do you think the long goodbye was difficult for you?
I don't know because I didn't tell you, 1 year before the breakup, I stopped playing football, which was my main career.
Oh, right. Okay. So that's the three-car pileup.
Yeah, but nobody expected that. But I had the courage to do it. I didn't overthink anything. I think, and during the breakup, I had a healthy, I'm definitely a go-getter and solution-focused, and I'm going to keep on going. But I'm also that emotionally aware that at the same time, I allowed myself to feel.
Yes.
I was not late. I never late the whole day, but I had some moments. Yes. But I just were difficult moments. But I know I had to move through me.
So I asked you earlier whether the breakup had to played a part in your decision to move. What about the football?
Yeah.
Did that play a role in the breakup?
Probably.
Right. So now you have 3 events. One of which is voluntary, the leaving the professional track. One of which is involuntary, the breakup, and then one of which is voluntary. And that, by the way, will lead us eventually to the ABCs of meaning, right? Because one of them is an act of agency, and that's a lot of what happens in these periods, which is that we the way to get through them is to reclaim our sense that we're doing something and we're taking back agency in a situation where we don't have it, right? Because from a meaning point of view, the back-to-back-to-back that I experienced, what I said earlier, the back-to-back-to-back of cancer, financial trouble, my father trying to take his own life, and if you want to add the children, then it becomes becoming a parent of 2 children in 32 minutes, then almost losing my ability to walk and almost losing my ability to live, financial difficulty coupled with a family crisis. Okay, that back-to-back-to-back event is massive. And what's similar about your back-to-back event, a work crisis, a relationship crisis, and then a moving across the planet, that is what I call a meaning vacuum. That all of the sources of meaning in our lives, or a lot of them, have been vaporized in a very short period of time. I go from being single to being married, from being married to having children to almost losing my life, right? To then having a work crisis because my life was running all over the planet and writing books and making television about them. I was the walking guy. You mentioned I wrote Walking the Bible. I made a TV show that was seen by 50 million people around the planet about me walking around, going to places, and suddenly I can't walk. So the sources of meaning in life. You were an athlete. Okay, you had a committed relationship for a long period of time. You were from this small country in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, and that's your whole identity. All of that changes. That's a meaning vacuum. And in vacuums, things do crazy things. Particles start moving in odd directions, and where they land is totally beyond our control. And that's why the response to the meaning vacuum is then taking control over the levers that give us meaning in our lives.
And we just reconstruct that in a different way then.
We reconstruct it.
Yeah.
Because the other way to put it in narrative terms, the There's this great term from psychology, from sociology, I don't know, probably at this point 40 years ago, that was totally forgotten, which I think is great, which is that these events are autobiographical occasions. It's a fantastic term. I don't know why more people, I'd like to popularize it. So we'll use your voice in the world to help popularize this term. What is an autobiographical occasion? It's an occasion where you have to tell your life story. Okay. So you go to a doctor, right? You go on a first date. Okay. You go on a job interview. These are occasions where you have to tell your life story. And how you tell that life story at a doctor or a first date or a job interview is going to be different. It shows you that your life story can be told multiple different ways. So suddenly I'm an Icelandic soccer star, in a committed, loving relationship. Well, if those were 3 parts of your life story, which I think you've been pretty clear they were, and they're not there, you're in an autobiographical occasion. You have to rewrite the story that you're telling about your life. Okay, that's a pile of donuts or 3 piles of donuts. The same thing. If I'm the walking guy, and I can't walk, like that's a pretty elemental part of my life story that suddenly has to be rewritten. So the entire exercise is an act of narrativizing our lives. And that's the connection between life and meaning, right? There, in a lot of ways, we don't really know what a story is. The people who study this stuff can't agree. But basically, a story is life events connected over time. So we'll go back to the pile of donuts, and I'll talk ice to you because you're from Iceland, and I'm being culturally insensitive. But a snowball is not a life story. I mean, it's not a story. A snowball is not a story. A bloody nose is not a story. A snowball and a bloody nose, that's a story. Mm. What's the connection between the snowball and the bloody nose? Who were the people? Did someone throw this snowball? Was there a fight? Was this? Now that's a story. So 2 events over time, okay? A happy soccer player with a beautiful girlfriend, who's a hero in his own country, that's not a very good story. Suddenly, the soccer star doesn't want to play soccer anymore. The beautiful girl doesn't want to be in the relationship with the athlete, and Iceland is no longer home. That's an interesting story. And the mechanism that we use to stitch those together is a story. And then the mechanism to draw insight from that is the act of meaning making. And that's the difference between a happy life and a meaningful life. A happy life is a snowball or a bloody nose. It's the connection between the 2. And then the way you get meaning is you stitch together past, present, and future.
Mm-hmm. And in a way, because Mac Adams' work on like the redemption narrative and contamination, like it also matters how you construct your life story in a sense, what kind of a meaning you make, right? Because brutal facts happen and you can acknowledge that, but at the end of the day, you are the author of your own story, and it makes a huge difference in your life in what story you decide to create and narrative.
Yeah, you're talking about Dan McAdams, who, as we sit here, I think is now the retired chairman of the psychology department at Northwestern. He began doing these life stories when he was a young graduate student, when narrative psychology was at its youngest. And he's part of these pioneers. I talked to him, in the course of doing this work with life stories. And that's exactly right. But to me, the question, and I said that trying to name the pileup was one of the top 3 hardest things to do. The single hardest thing I had to do was try to figure out how it is that we make meaning from these stories. And so without going through the whole process of coding and exploring this and trying to identify it, I identified what I call the ABCs of meaning. And we've been dancing around it in this conversation, so now we can talk about it a little bit more. If you go back, let's go back to 1900. Okay, that's 125 years ago, essentially, as we have this conversation. Most of the sources of meaning in our lives were decided for us. Our parents decided where we were going to live, what we were going to do, who we were going to love, and what we were going to believe. 125 years later, as we sit here today, most of that is not true anymore. You can live where you want to live. You can do what you want to do. You can love who you want to love. You can believe what you want to believe. That is an incredible amount of change for how we live in an astonishingly short period of time. As we sit here and have this conversation, I just published this book called A Time to Gather about rituals. We have evidence that humans were doing rituals 300,000 years ago. The first thing we did before we were anatomically humans was to get together and bury our dead. So the fact that we have been meaning making for 300,000 years and this amount of change has happened in 125 years is an astonishing amount of instability. We wonder why people are unsettled and unsure and depressed and hello, that is an incredible amount of change in a very short period of time. It creates opportunity, especially for people who are outside the mainstream, right? So people from countries that are on the edge of the world, this is a great opportunity for. People who might have, LGBTQ people who may not be, who have attractions for outside of what was conventional, have unconventional career paths, right? Have women who were excluded from most jobs before the last 125 years. So for most people, this is a great opportunity, but we get writer's block writing the story of our life. It's too many choices. We get paralysis from having to make these decisions. So how do we make them? We make them through what I call the ABCs of meaning. What is that? The A is agency. That's what we do or make or create in our lives. For most of us, it's our work, okay? The B is belonging. That's our relationships, our love, our friends, our neighbors, our loved ones, our family, the people we march in rallies with or take cold plunges with or whatever it might be. That's B, that's belonging. And the C is a cause. That's a purpose, something higher than ourselves. In narrative terms, this is your me story, your we story, and your thee story. Okay? We all have all three within us. And we have a kind of ranking. So I'll start with myself and then I'll ask you. So I'm an ABC, okay? I'm a writer, I'm a creator, I'm a, in a sense, an entrepreneur. I'm also a very involved family member and a super involved dad. Cause, calling, less important to me. So I'm an ABC. I'm probably, if I gave us each 100 points, I'm probably 40-40-20. Okay, so what is your order of ABC? What's your order? And if I gave you 100 points, how would you allot it? I almost want to write this down like one of those people, but I want to guess.
Yeah.
So what's your...
I would say A to start with, just taking on the agency, what I've done in my life and for the past couple of years. It's definitely a lot of agency.
Yeah.
I think that scores highest for me. I think second one is probably a cause.
Cause, for sure, yes.
And then the third one is belonging. But I carefully pick people who wants to give. Yeah. I value family. I visit my mom because she knew I was coming to New York. So she said, we're halfway there. You should come to Iceland. And I just looked her in the eyes and I was just like, yes, I'll come to Iceland for you. So like I value family. I visit them two times a year and I go out of my way to do that. And I value friendship. So I do, and I value community. But that's more of a, that's more of a, if I have free time, that's I hang out with my friends. But I would say, and I would allocate
50-30-20.
Yeah, probably. 50-30-20.
I met him 2 hours ago, but he's going to say 50-30-20.
I agreed. Yeah, 50-30-20.
So my wife is a CAB. Okay, so she's an entrepreneur. She started an organization called Endeavor that supports high-impact entrepreneurs in 50 countries around the world. She's very cause-oriented, never happier than when she's helping other people. These entrepreneurs find their way in the world. Then she's a co-founder and a CEO. She's very agentic. Belonging, like outside of family, not so important. So she's a CAB. So we've now established 2 different things. I'm an ABC. She's a CAB. You're an ACB, okay? But here's the thing. In a transition, we shape-shift. So maybe you've been working very hard and then suddenly you become a parent and you want to spend more time with your children. Maybe you get fired and you want to give back, okay? Or maybe you retire. Or maybe you've been a primary caretaker of children and your children leave home and you want to say, now it's time to do something for myself, right? Or maybe you want to give back. Or maybe you're giving back and you burned out and you want to do. So what happens in a transition, if you go back in your story to what we've now established as the defining lifequake in your life, where you left your work and your relationship ended and you left your homeland and your mother. Before that, you were not an ABC. You were not an ACB then. No way. You would have been in maybe an ABC.
Yes, when I was playing soccer. As I was developing my psychological career, that kind of changed.
Yes.
But as I was playing soccer, probably 80%.
Exactly, right. So maybe 80, 10, 10. Right. Yeah. So that's the point. So in your life, you changed.
Yeah.
This is the point. This is the point. In transitions, we shape shift, I call it, because each of these has shapes. We won't go into that, but that's in the book, Life is in the Transitions. But we make these changes, and that gets back to the idea of our life has many more twists and turns, and that gets the idea that our work life also is a nonlinear narrative, that our priorities change. And when our priorities change, we now have the freedom to change our work if we so choose.
So it's helpful to understand that. And then also, when you're going through a transition, assume, take a standpoint of where you stand on those.
Yes.
Yeah. And then navigate.
Yeah. You take stock. You do what I call a meaning audit.
Yeah.
And it's not a very pleasant term because of the tax implications in English about an audit, but you basically take stock of who you are, where you are, and how do you want to, think of it like a scale with the 3 dishes, not 2. And we have, you have pebbles in each, or coins in each one. And you may say, I want to take a couple coins and move it from here over here. And you change. And that's a part of it. And it's helpful when you're in a transition. It's also helpful when you're forced to. Right? Let's just say you're in a relationship and maybe your partner wants to go back to school or has lost their job or wants to leave a corporate job to start, a wellness, a yoga practice, or, wants to start being a painter. When they go through and maybe you then have to say, okay, I'm now responsible for making more money. But when you make that decision, you're doing it voluntarily and you're saying, I'm not doing it for the rest of my life because I'm going to go through changes. Life is going to come at me. The partner I'm with, my kids are going to grow older. So every decision doesn't need to be forever. And that just puts a little bit less pressure on it.
Yeah, because I think most of the time people, and I've certainly been in that camp, I'm making the decision of my life.
Yes.
When it's just a decision.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? Because if your mother's listening to this or your future life partner, we've just established that you've made a massive change already in the equation that gives you meaning, and you can make it again. I can imagine sitting here, some number of years from now, you're in a committed relationship, you've had children, okay, maybe your parents are older and getting sick, or maybe they're not with us. All of these things have factors. Life is long, life is nonlinear, and there are many more twists and turns. And once you accept that you're going to spend half your life in a transition, you're not threatened by any transition, because the next one is coming soon enough. That's the big difference. And, in one of some ways, the most heartfelt and poignant and beautiful thing you asked me was, what do you say to someone that's off track or off schedule or off kilter is the 3 most powerful words in the English language. The 3 most powerful words in the English language are, you're not alone. You are not alone. That makes it 4. But you are not alone. You're not alone in feeling this way. You're not alone in going through a transition. You're not alone in being confused and in pain and fearful and sad and shameful about it, or some combination. You're also not alone in your ability to take control over it, identify that you're going through a transition, identify the emotions, hold a ritual, shed certain habits, experiment with new habits, share your story with others, and then eventually update your life story and unveil your new self. You're not alone. The rest of us are feeling this way too. Stop putting a pressure on yourself and say, you can add a new chapter your life story?
Yeah, I think that it brings the element of compassion, shared humanity, or shared suffering.
Yeah.
Of like, people think that, like you said, people think they're alone with their problems or they're going through a rough time, but everybody, a lot of people are going through a rough time, and everybody can relate to the feelings that you're experiencing.
50%, half of our adult lives, we're in transition.
Yeah, right.
Half of the people you know are either in one or about to be in one or leaving one. If you're in one, call a friend and ask for help. And if you happen to be in a phase when you're not in one, call someone else you love and offer to help them.
Mm-hmm.
But no, if you're going to help someone, the people want different kinds of help. This was one of the also fascinating things that I had not seen in the literature. Okay, I'm going through a transition and I call you. Okay? Your instinct, what type of support are you going to offer me?
I'm going to ask if you want to be helped, hugged, or hurt.
Well, that's good. Okay.
But I'll tell you what I've done, what I would do a couple of years ago. I would have straight going back to like giving you a solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but what you've just said is much smarter, and it is something that appears in my book, and I won't take credit for your saying that, but people want different kinds of things, right? Because there's kind of one or three. Some people like huggers. Oh, I love you, Beggi. You'll get through it. I believe in you, right? Some people want nudgers. I love you, but maybe you should try this, or like maybe you should try that. And some people like what I call slappers, not actual slappers, but metaphor. Like, I love you, but get over yourself, and these are the three things you have to do. And the biggest mistake you can make is assume that the other that what you want is what the other person would want.
Mm-hmm.
So what you just said is exactly right. My way of saying this is ask before you advise, rather than assume that what I want is what you would want. Ask me what I want. Do you want me to hold your hand? Get under the covers with you with a cat and tell you you'll get through it? Or do you want me to gently suggest something? Or do you want me to give you a 5-point plan that you can go implement? And you should really ask before you advise, because if not, you're not going to be the friend that you could be.
Yeah, I think it's such I went through this the hard way. I think there's so many people who find it uncomfortable to just like listen and be there for people instead of like jumping into the solution. But like, if I only want to share something, sometimes I just want to share something, and if somebody suggests me a solution or whatever, I'm just like, I didn't ask you for it. You like push that person away.
Yes.
And I'm not asking for a coach. I'm just asking for a friend to hear what I have to say.
And they used to say, by the way, this is an interesting conversation, because they used to say, the kind of the research on this 30 years ago was that these attitudes were gendered, right? And that, men wanted to offer solutions and women would just comfort. In my experience, and I don't have data on this, but my own life experience, in my own marriage, in most of my close friends, I would say that the men are more kind of, emotionally nuanced and open, and the women are powerful executives who are like, bring me solutions. We have a family mission statement that we did when our children were very young. That's in the house where we sit now. That's downstairs. And one of my wife's big contribution was, I don't like problems, I like solutions. So she's a very action-oriented. She has hundreds of people working for her. She has an organization in 50 countries. She's making decisions quickly. I'm the one who wants to think about it and wants to talk about it and wants to explore. And when we have to buy a new chair, I'll spend weeks and bring her 25 options, and she'll look and make a decision in 2 minutes, and we got to move on. I got other decisions to make. So it's this impulse to want to offer solutions, or to want to sit and hold and whatever, like in the 5 love languages. She's like, I want words of affirmation. Tell me nice things. You'll be done. I'll be done in a minute. I want quality time. I want to sit and talk about it for 2 hours. And she's like, I got the worst end of the stick here. You got it easy. All you have to do is say something nice about me. I got to sit there and listen to you for 2 hours. It's totally not fair. So they used to say that this was gendered, and I think it's much less gendered than it was in the past.
Interesting. I would like to, because I directly, I would assume that it's more the man who likes solutions. And give me the solution to this problem. I don't want to talk about it. But
I like talking about it.
Yeah. I like both.
Yeah, that's you. I'm thinking about you. Like you're good. You're still probably pretty good at the messy middle, but you're also good at the new beginnings, by the way, because like I've again, just what I've known about your life story from seeing you publicly and then spending an afternoon with you, you're not afraid to move across the country. You're not afraid to say, I'm now going to become a content creator, or I had a video go viral and I don't want to feed that. I want to go in a different direction. You're not afraid to turn the page, which is probably why you were messy middle #1, new beginning #2, and long goodbye #3. But think about the pandemic, right? And the pandemic, that was a crisis of the long goodbye. When we first got in it, like, oh, we're going to stay indoors and, we're going to return to life. That was a crisis of the long goodbye. We were never going back. It took people a long time to go back. And by the way, what did people do? The great relocation. They moved. They changed jobs. They either changed relationships or they had children or they deepened relationships. It fits this model very, very well.
Yeah, it's so funny. At the end of the pandemic, I was like, I haven't changed. Things haven't changed for me. Like, I'm still doing the same thing. And then I looked to stop playing soccer.
Yes.
You and your girlfriend broke up. You moved to America. Your grandfather that you were very close to died. It was just like everything.
By the way, not if you saw the pandemic as 5 months. If you saw the pandemic as 5 years, in that 5 years is when all the change happened. But it takes a while, right? So that would be another interesting question if we did your life story. Where we started with the move, and then we realized the breakup was connected to the move. Then we realized that the ending of the soccer dream was connected to the other two, and now we're realizing that the pandemic might have been connected.
100%.
This is the narrative life.
Yeah,
in that the one pile of donuts has a whole series of downward reaction. That's the butterfly effect, right? The butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, okay, and it causes a tornado in Houston. That's what life is. Life is a nonlinear, chaotic entity. We have understood that the life is that way. What we're just becoming and beginning to understand is that the human life is the same thing.
Because think the lifequakes, when you get smacked in the face.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay.
You could also quit the career.
Voluntarily.
You could also have children. You can get married. You can move across.
Can be positive,
So half of them are smacked in the face broadly, and half are you smacking life in the face.
Yeah. No, 100%. No, I
that's why I like the word lifequake. Most of the way the scholars have talked about this is as a crisis.
Yeah, right.
Right, or a monster curveball, or a disruptive. Like I like lifequake, and I think lifequake has caught on a little bit from my usage of it because it's neutral, and also because we know that sometimes the most painful things also can become, obviously losing a loved one is deeply painful, and you may never recover from it, also depending on what kind of person it is.
Yeah.
One thing is losing a parent in their 80s, another is losing a child at 8. Like, that's a harder thing to get over. But we do know that sometimes painful things can have more meaningful outcomes, and sometimes joyful things can have distressing outcomes. So the relationship between the positive and negative affect is much more complicated, which is why talking about life as a meaning-making event as opposed to a happiness-making event is much more effective and accurate.
Yeah. Wow. Did you talk about the life events theory in your book, where they calculate that the score and the likelihood you get sick in the next year? It's like both positive and quote-unquote negative effect. Like challenging moments and positive moments. So getting a raise, getting married is also accounted. And they calculated gave that a certain type of score, and then you match them together. And then if you get a score over, I think it was 300, you have a 50% chance of developing some sickness in the next year or something.
Oh, interesting.
It's a theory, I remember. But I remember I did it for fun when I came across it, and I just exploded the scale, and I was like, I'm not going to get sick.
What's interesting about that is it corresponds to the way I was talking about pileups earlier, which is it sort of weakens the immune system.
Yeah.
Because that's an interesting thing that happens in these lifequakes, right? Which is that sometimes you might, there's a very captivating story in my book about a man who who was an editor of a magazine that had in the United States that had a big scandal attached to it. And a result of it a year later was that he lost his job. And he told me the story, which is in Life is in the Transitions, that he had been in what he called a loveless marriage for a long time. And then he was at a conference and he ended up having a romantic encounter at this. And it was like, my life is already so up in the air, like I'll just add more to it. So sometimes, so that's like, you, as I said, your immune system gets weaker and you go through change. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that in a period of change, that sickness would come out of it because your immune system, which I'm talking about to a certain extent, your emotional immune system,
right,
but maybe your physical immune system itself is destabilized by this much change. It makes entire sense to me.
Oh, 100%. And the literature on expressive writing.
Yes.
James Pinneberger, that just supports like when you write for 20 minutes a day for 3 days.
3 days in a row. That's all you need to do. Forget
all your emotions and thoughts on paper, which is distressing in the moment. But like as the months go by, you get your psychological well-being increases, but your immune system markers, they increase, and you get fewer visits to the doctor office.
But why? What the Pennebaker research shows is that on day one of this 3 day of writing, you're just all over the place.
Right.
You're just putting your emotions down. The second day, you might be doing that. You begin to begin to find some order in the chaos of the story. And by day 3, you're already turning it into a story.
Right.
And I found recently when the pandemic hit and my children who loved school and were social and they were 14 and a half, which is a vulnerable time to be cut off from your friends as they were essentially for a year, I made them do this writing. And I looked at, and the day one was like, Dad is making us do this writing. And this is a stupid exercise. But you could begin to see in the couple of days that I could manage to make them do it, which is all the power that I had. And of course, all the research says you need, you could begin them see moving through the resistance into a narrativizing.
Right. And when it moves through, people start to use more because or therefore.
Yes.
And people who tend to use more of those words get even additional benefits because that tends to be a marker that they understand the story.
Exactly. And there's other things that happen too in these stories. You go from I to we, right?
Yeah.
You go from present tense to past tense. We do these things that allow us to make sense because we're wired for a story. And then suddenly we get a pile of donuts. And ultimately you got to do something with the pile of donuts. Mm-hmm. That's what you will do. And then, I mean, if you think about this, let's just say that you and I live together. We are friends, we're roommates, we're lovers, we're spouses, whatever it might be. You go off and live your day, and then I go off and I live my day. When we come back at the end of the day, we don't tell every single minute of what happened to us and every single thought that we had. No, you pick and choose. You pick and choose. And even more important, every time you pick and choose differently. Like, so let's talk about this for a second. I used to think that a memory was a fixed thing. Like I grew up, I used to watch The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Okay, this is totally alien cultural reference. He had the nighttime talk show in the US for whatever it was, 30 years. And at 11:30 every night, he would come out and he would give some jokes and then he would sit down and he would interview some people. And what he used to do was he used to come out and stand. They had a star on the stage and he would stand on the star. That's where the lights were focused. That's where the microphone was focused. That's where the cameras were focused. And he would tell his jokes. I used to think that that star was what a memory was. It was a fixed thing in time. Okay, this is the story of what happened on the day that I learned that I had cancer. But that's not what memories are. They are not things that live in boxes in the closet or in the basement, where every time I want to tell the story, I just told the story about creating the Council of Dads. I didn't go and get a box from the closet, open it up, and there's the Council of Dads story. How many times I've told the Council of Dads? I wrote a book about it. There was a TV show about it. I've given 500 speeches about it. I was telling it differently. That's what a memory is. Every time we retrieve a memory, from our minds, we retrieve it in a different way. And that's what it means to have the story, is to retell it depending on where you are in your own life story. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's not fixed.
It's an active process in a sense.
It's an active process. And every time you tell it in a different way.
Yeah. 100%. And it's not something you do like once and then it's over. It's just always in the making.
Because it changes.
Yeah.
Right? The story you just told me about your big life quake, okay, that has a kind of certain linear order, right? But what are the elements we've established? The pandemic, okay, the football quake, the love quake, the home quake, and the work quake. Okay, you did them all. Okay, in a 5-year period. But you're telling me that story now when you're in a period of thinking about psychology, making human connections, building a public persona, being a person who helps people go through these times. If you and I got together and we've established in some years in the future and you have a relationship and you have a child and you're living in a different place, that story is going to look very different. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to accept that our stories are nonlinear. A lot of this work is shaped by a conversation that I had almost more than 15 years ago now. I was working on a book that became The Secrets of Happy Families. And I was interested in family dinner. And everybody in the family space says, you got to have family dinner. It's very important except that most of us don't do it and don't have time. And my wife runs an organization around the world. She didn't come home before 6:30 or 7, and our children needed to be bathed and fed and get ready to bed. And so we weren't having these like fantastical family dinner conversations. Turns out family dinner is not important. What's important is what you do over the family dinner. And if you can do it over dinner, great, but it's only 10 minutes of conversation. The rest is taken up with take your elbows off the table and pass the ketchup or pass the, whatever it is you're passing in Iceland. So if you can do that 10 minutes over dinner, if not, do it when, do it over bedtime, do it at breakfast, do it in the afternoon, do it while doing the dishes, it doesn't matter. And in the course of thinking about this, I was introduced to a man named Marshall Duke, who's a psychologist at Emory University, who just stepped down after 50 consecutive years of being a professional psychologist at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And I basically invited myself to dinner at his house. And he told me about this research that he did in 2001, because his wife said that she worked with special needs children. And she said this, the children who know more about their family seem better able to navigate the difficulties in their lives. So he and Robin Fivish, a colleague, did this research, and they made a set of questions, which I later called in the New York Times the Do You Know test. Do you know where your grandparents were born? Do you know an aunt or an uncle who had an illness they overcame? Do you know what happened when your parents met? Do you know what happened when around the time that you were born? The children who answered these questions the most successfully, meaning they know the most about their family history, it was the number one predictor of a child's emotional well-being. And when I asked him why knowing family history was valuable for a child's emotional well-being, what he said was, there are 3 types of family stories. There's an ascending narrative. We came from nothing. We worked hard. We have a lot. Okay? That's a linear upward line. There's a descending. We had a lot. There was a war, a famine, a recession, a pandemic, and we lost it all. Or that's a linear down. Or there's what he called an oscillating family narrative with lots of twists and turns. Your grandfather came to this country. He worked very hard. He became vice president of a bank. His house burned down. His daughter was the first in the family to get to go to college, and she became a doctor. Then she got breast cancer. The children who understand that life is oscillating, when they hit one of those oscillations, when they hit one of these life quakes, they're more capable of navigating it. And I have told this story a lot I wrote an article about this in the New York Times called The Stories That Bind Us. That was like the second most emailed piece on the planet for the year. And people think that they do it, but they don't. We want to protect our children. We want to protect ourselves. But the more we understand that life has oscillations, every time we hit an isolation, we don't think it's abnormal. We think it's normal. And then we go out trying to get the most out of the oscillation that we can.
Because it makes us flexible, more adaptable, and therefore more resilient, because we have gone through that before, right?
Because we are making meaning out of a story that otherwise has no meaning. You know, I said earlier that we don't understand a lot about stories. One thing that we know is the story itself does not have inherent meaning. You know, there's a shelf of books over there. You and I could read every book on that shelf and have a conversation about it. We would take different meaning from the story.
Right.
And once you accept the fact that you get to pick the meaning you want from the story,
right,
it actually empowers you. It's harder, but it can be a lot more meaningful.
Yeah. I want to move to the last thing, is talking a little bit about ritual, then we'll end it. In terms of Time to Gather, new book, and it's about rituals in a world that is, as I understanding the technology and how the world has changed, there's less room for traditional rituals and more different type of ritual, which you can probably explain way better than I'm doing now. But like, let's take the context because of the transition, the importance of rituals in transition for people. Like, why? Because I have many rituals that I've done that has helped me through this transition. So if you could explain that maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the story was that, so my wife and I went from what we say in American English, from empty nest to full nest in 32 minutes, 21 years ago. And 18 years later, we went from full nest to empty nest. We dropped our children off at opposite ends of the same college. And I walked through the front door of the home where we're sitting now, and I felt homesick in my own home. And it was a very precise feeling. And I thought, you can't use that term. And I realized it wasn't just my children, that all of the relationships in my life had frayed in some level, right? My dad had just died. My mom was aging. My kids were gone. My marriage needs to be renegotiated. My friendships need to get remade. And I went looking for solutions, and I stumbled onto this incredible story that I think of as maybe one of the great untold stories in the world right now. And it has to do with rituals. Like, rituals, we know, hold groups together. We have 300,000 years of evidence that they calm us when we're stressed and synchronize our heartbeats and make our families and our neighborhoods and our friendships and our classrooms and our teams closer. And that has happened for thousands of centuries until this century, when we've turned our back on traditional rituals. And so the difference between what I was experiencing, my initial thought was, I'm the lifequake guy. Like, I'm the transition guy. I should be ready. And I realized that lifequakes and life transitions are mostly individual. And what I was experiencing was more relational. Like, it was not a lifequake, it was a group quake. And that rituals are effective in lifequakes to help us, calm us, restabilize us, help us find our sure footing. They're very good at that, but they're even more important at groups. So when the group gets destabilized, when someone comes into the group, like a wedding or a baby, when someone leaves the group, like a coming of age or a death, when someone moves or gets sick, the group has to remake itself, and they remake itself with rituals, okay? Birth ritual. And all of these we have turned our backs on. Birth rituals not as anywhere near as common. Now marriage, much less common, okay? In 1960, 90% of American adults got married in the course of their lives. Now, only half of us are married. And by the way, this was shocking to me. Only it's happened to funerals too. In 1970, 5% of Americans were cremated. Now it's 65% going to 80%. So that means only a third of us are buried. And not that many more have rituals of any kind. So traditional rituals are in decline. And yet these new rituals are popping up all over. And for things that we never honored before. Right? So NICU graduations, right? And gender reveals and soberversaries and cancerversaries and end-of-life doulas and end-of-company doulas. And if you quit your job and lost your relationship now, you would have a ritual that people wouldn't have done in the past. A lot of these are things that institutions didn't celebrate. So not just marriage, but divorce, right? Not just fertility, but infertility, not just birth, but stillbirth. So basically people are saying, we all know, as you and I sit here and have this conversation, that the enemy is in our pockets. That we are abandoning our relationships for our phones. We are abandoning looking at face-to-face conversations for face-to-screen interactions. We know, I just wrote a piece about this in the New York Times called "This is the Antidote to the Lonely Life of Screens." Went crazy viral again because we know in our hearts that we have pulled back from our relationships and there's a craving for it. And this is happening around the world. I call it the ritual renaissance, an astonishing creation, and a lot of which, by the way, you participate in. You know, I went to group baptism at the Vatican and traditional bride price negotiations in South Africa and an adolescent tooth filing in Bali and 6 weddings in a day in Las Vegas and 10 funerals in a week in Ireland and your specialty, sauna and cold plunging, you know, in Denmark and forest bathing in the Andes Mountains of Chile, right? And sound bathing and healing in Bangkok. These are all new ways of connecting. And so what A Time to Gather does is it's both an incredible adventure story and a sort of simple toolkit for not just taking care of yourself, but taking care of the groups that you're a part of. If you go to Instagram, self-care has like 21 million, hashtags. Group care has like 21. Like, it's like, we don't even have a language for this anymore. So Life is in Transitions is about how to mark the lifequakes of your life and handle your own transitions. A Time to Gather is how to go through the same periods and reconnect with those around you.
Mm. What was the most meaningful ritual that you took part of?
The most meaningful ritual is the one that we did here. So after going all this, my wife says, okay, hotshot, now you're a ritual designer. We need to do one with our children. Our children were turning 20. So they were leaving teenage years. And I was like, I'm not the designer. Like, I'm the thinker, but no, you're going to design one. So rituals need 3 things to succeed. They need sacred space. Like, you need to create boundaries. Welcome people into the circle, or, think about it like circuses have rings and trials have courtrooms and yogas have circles and the sauna cold plunge has the sound. Like, you have to welcome people in. So we went to Central Park in the middle of New York because when our children were little, the artist Christo and Jean-Claude covered it in saffron banners, and we went there to recreate it. Welcomed people. This is why we're here to mark it. Everything went wrong. I brought a white blanket and I stepped on it with my muddy shoes, and then a dog jumped. I mean, like, everything went wrong. But it was like, create a special place. Then you need what I call a peace plan. You're going to have a ritual. There's going to be conflict. You and I are getting married. You want a small wedding. I want a big wedding. You and I are grieving. You want to lie under the covers with the cat. I want a big old Irish wake. You got to give everybody something to do, right? So I created a thing where we passed around a loaf of bread, and everybody this is taken from the Jewish tradition of throwing out bread for Passover. Everyone took a piece of bread and threw out a childhood habit, something we did in our family that we wanted to move beyond, okay? And then replace that with a list of favorite sayings that we had, right? So we did that, and we threw the bread. And then you want to end with a moment of hope. Okay, psychologists like to talk about your best possible self. I'm sure you read a lot about that. This is our best possible self. What's the best version of this group? So we walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, which was something we used to do when I had cancer, and I would do it on crutches for the first time, because this was sort of reminding us this is our family at its best. So I went to all these amazing ones, and they are amazing. And I have the story in here of jumping the broom and the story of a Taylor Swift divorce party. Like, the stories are incredible here. But ultimately, the one that we did for ourselves was the most meaningful.
It's beautiful. If all your work, all your books, everything that you learned, everything you did, everything you learned through your traveling and everything, was just gone tomorrow, all your work, you couldn't access it, and just had one idea or message for people that you could leave behind, what would that be?
Tell the story. What I say to my kids is, and I tell this story in A Time Together. Someone gave me a great piece of advice. I wrote a book called The Secrets of Happy Families, but one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard, someone else said to me, always be happy to see your children. Always welcome them with joy. Open your eyes, be excited. And I realized not long ago, now that my children are young adults, that that's only half of it. Because you want to be happy when you see them, but you also want to be understanding that they may be going through more complex emotions, that they may not be happy, they may be having difficulty. And so what I say to my kids now, which is in effect what I'm saying to myself and what I'm saying to you and anyone listening to us is, but what I say to my kids now is, I'm good on the good days, I'm better on the bad days. When it gets hard, when it gets sticky, when it gets messy, when it gets painful, when it gets confusing, when it gets challenging, when you want to give up, when you want to lie under the covers, when you want to make a 212-item to-do list, when you don't know what to do, that's when I'm good. And what you do then is you turn it into a story. You take the most joyful things and the most difficult things, and you turn them into a story, then you take control over them, and it becomes part of your own life story. That is the great human gift. The greatest human invention is symbol. It's the idea to have an abstract thing that can hold meaning. That can be a ritual, that can be a religion, that can be, an emotion, or that can be a story. That is what makes us human. And today, when we are threatened by technology, when we are being told that artificial intelligence and all of its offspring are going to challenge, when we're going to become transhuman, the most important thing that we can do is double down on what makes us human, and that is a story. So what have I learned? Tell the story.
That's beautiful.
You take care of your story, it will take care of you.
Bruce, I'm so glad that I picked up your book in Barnes & Nobles a couple of years ago. It changed my life. It helped me turn it into my kind of passion, I would say. I've learned a lot from you, and your book and your work helped me a lot in my life. And I'm really grateful for that, because that gave me mechanism to understand what I was going through and get some understanding, and that somebody was in the same shoes as I was. And now transitions have become kind of my passion now, helping people through that and going through them by myself. And I just want to thank you for continuing to be a light in this world despite the storms that hit in your life, and that you're still getting at it at this age. And I'm just and thanks for inviting me to your home and for the conversation we had before the podcast. And I'm grateful that you gave yourself the time to talk and invited me to your home and have so hospitable and letting me set up this everything in your house and moving furniture. So I'm happy that I met you, and thank you for your presence in the world.
I'm happy to make what I call a new old friend. And you're a new old friend because there's only one way we're going to get through this, and that's together.